Hello, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Welcome to today's webinar, which is Minimizing Burnout and Compassion Fatigue. Well, we have professional self-care here on the screen today, so that's what we're going to roll with. Joining us is Partnership to End Addiction, and my name is Bree. I am the Youth Prevention Manager at Not My Kid. Not My Kid is a nonprofit specializing in prevention and behavioral health for youth and families. Our commitment is to offer the best prevention and behavioral health services to protect youth mental health and to leverage the power of lived experience. We make a difference in the community by educating people to build resiliency, inspire hope for the future, and grow connection and communication. Our mission is to ensure every kid thrives by inspiring positive life choices. With us, we have Partnership to End Addiction, a national nonprofit organization based in New York City. Partnership's mission is to transform how our nation addresses addiction by empowering families, advancing effective care, shaping public policy, and changing culture. Joining us is Dr. Richter, the Senior Vice President of Prevention Research and Analysis at Partnership to End Addiction, and Corey Hammond, the Director of Prevention Services. I will go ahead and let you take it over.
Thanks so much, Bree. And I wanted to quickly introduce, for those who haven't met her yet, our new Associate Director of Prevention Services, Janelle, who's joining us and will be watching along on this webinar. But hopefully you've joined us for some of our previous professional development webinars. This is our last one for the calendar year, which feels wild, but we're going to be talking about a really important topic. And sorry for switching up the title on you, but it's professional self-care, and we're talking about minimizing burnout and compassion fatigue. And so here is our contents of this presentation. And, afterwards we'll all be meditative like this respite man in the meadow of lavender, hopefully. We're going to be talking about professional stress and compassion fatigue and burnout. I feel like especially towards the end of the year around the holidays, even though a lot of people are taking time off, this is a stressful time where it can often feel like we're burnt out. And so we're going to talk about what that means for those of us in helping professions, caregiving professions. So how to recognize what burnout and compassion fatigue are, how to prevent them from getting worse, and how to address it if we find ourselves kind of in the throes of it. And then kind of the other side of that coin, similar but slightly different, we'll talk about self-care, why it's so important, and what some specific strategies are for practicing self-care. Parts of this will be interactive, so I'll be looking to you all to go into the chat, and I also have some Slido polls, so if you have your phone nearby, or you can open up another browser window and we'll get into those. So to start us off, I want to talk about professional stress and compassion fatigue. Obviously, if you are in this webinar right now, you are someone who works in a nonprofit, or you work in some type of advocacy or caring role. And so we know that people in these types of roles, whether it's healthcare or behavioral health or, whatever slew of helping professions we can think of, are at high risk for professional stress, burnout, and compassion fatigue. And so we're going to talk about what those terms are and what we can do about them. But first, I wanted to bring up this Slido poll. So the first question is on a number scale, with 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. What is your current level of stress in this role that you have? And this is anonymous. It's not going to pop up with your name, but it will auto-populate live. So you can either scan the QR code on your phone, or you can join on slido.com with the number there at the bottom. So I'll give us a few moments to fill this out. Okay, if you haven't filled it out yet, definitely take time to do it if you would like, but it seems like 50% of us are in the 3 range, which I think is pretty good. Linda and I did this poll with a group of prevention specialists a few weeks ago in New Jersey, and we had a lot of varied answers. We had a couple ones, but we had a lot of fives, and everyone was kind of all over the distribution. So threes and twos, I think, are certainly reasonable answers. A 4, that seems like kind of a high level of stress, but maybe one that we can work with. Okay, and then we have another one. And it should, if you were doing it from your phone, it should automatically switch to the next question. Again, number scale 1 through 5, with 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. How much do you prioritize your own well-being? Kind of whatever that means to you. And here, 4 is the most common answer, followed closely by 3. So again, I feel like this is pretty good. I don't know if this is surprising to you all how your peers have answered, but it seems like at least for the majority of us, our stress level is lower than how much we're prioritizing our own well-being, which is kind of skewing in the positive direction we would hope for. And so maybe as we go through this presentation, you can think about what are some of the things that might be leading to the stress that you have in your role, and what are some of the things that you can take from this or research on your own, or some changes that you can make to try to prioritize your well-being a little bit more. Because certainly I hope we all know that it's very important, but if anything, this presentation will underscore that fact. And so here I have a quick video. It's like a minute long. This might be a metaphor or a video that you've seen before, but I feel like it's a good representation of how we want to start thinking about stress in our professional lives.
How heavy is this glass of water? Melissa, would you care to answer?
8 ounces,
12 ounces?
16 ounces.
The absolute weight of the glass doesn't matter. It depends on how long I hold on to it. If I hold it for a minute, nothing happens. If I hold it for an hour, my arm will begin to ache. If I hold it all day long, my arm will feel numb and paralyzed. Well, the weight of the glass hasn't changed, but the longer I hold on to it, the heavier it becomes. The stresses and the worries of life are like this glass of water. If you think about them for a little while, there's no problem. Think about it for a little bit longer, it begins to hurt. You think about them all day long, and you'll feel paralyzed, incapable of doing anything. Always remember, put the glass down.
So a pretty good reminder about stress over time, and in our professional lives, the reminder that we need to put that glass down sometimes. And so,
Sorry, could I just interrupt for one quick
yeah,
second?
yeah, please.
Yeah, so the focus of this is certainly on all of you and you know, how to handle your own stressors. But sorry, I'm like the downer on this, but I think a lot of this is also things you could take away when you're kind of working with kids or families or just in your professional role as well. So certainly the priority is to apply what we're going to talk about today to yourself. But a lot of this, you know, could be useful also in your professional life. So sorry for kind of moving it off gear from, you know, focusing on you, but I think there's a lot of good lessons in here that we could take with us in various roles that we play.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks for that, Linda. And in bringing it back to our kind of professional lives is this idea of compassion fatigue, which is the emotional toll of caring for others. And so for those of us where it's our job, it can certainly affect anyone who cares for others. We hear about it a lot in terms of health workers, social workers, teachers, counselors, EMS, but also people who volunteer in roles like this. And it can have very legitimate psychosocial symptoms. It can cause things like irritability, insomnia, a loss of empathy, or a desensitization. It can lead to feelings of guilt, or it can lead to burnout, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And so this is a very real thing that people in these roles go through. And it's certainly not a sign of weakness, but it's just a natural response to witnessing human suffering, witnessing difficult times in others, and the one being tasked with trying to do something about it. Another analogy that gets talked about a lot in this topic is the oxygen mask analogy, probably something you've heard before. It's an explanation for self-care in a caring role. So on an airplane, in case of emergency, the flight attendant always says in the safety briefing to put on your own mask before assisting others. And the reason for this is that if you try and help someone else get their mask on before you put yours on, there's a possibility that you could both pass out from lack of oxygen. So while it may feel kind of selfish to help yourself first in this moment, in order to ensure the safety of the people that you care about, it does make the most sense for you to help yourself first. So if you put your mask on first, then you have the energy and the focus and the oxygen that you need to focus on helping others around you who might need your help. So it's the same idea as like you can't pour from an empty cup, you know, these idioms that you've heard before.
Hey, Corey, quick
Yeah.
addition here that I heard or read recently that I thought was really really powerful, which is if you take this analogy back one step, it's to allow others to put the mask on for you. So it's another form of sort of self-care or ensuring that you are in good shape to help others, is to not only put that mask on first, you know, theoretically speaking, but to structure your life in such a way where you have these relationships where you allow for interdependence and for others to help you when you need it. We talk about this a lot with when we're advising parents to make sure that they're modeling being able to accept help and accept care from others and be in kind of strong relationships, whether with other family members or peers, and that models to kids that it's okay to ask for help. But I just thought that that was like a nice addition to this analogy where, you make sure try to make sure that in your life you're in a position where there are others around you who would be willing to do that for you and where you're willing to accept it.
Definitely. Yeah, I haven't heard that side of it before, and I like that a lot.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I'm sure that you've heard a lot of these analogies or things before, but it is a good reminder and something that is worth hearing over and over again. Specifically about compassion fatigue, this is a infographic made for social workers, but we can certainly kind of extend this to anybody in a caring profession. And so compassion fatigue can really affect people in a lot of ways. And it's not something that is always obvious. It's not like you wake up one day and you say, oh, I'm experiencing compassion fatigue. It could be very kind of underneath the surface. And so it is important to try to recognize signs as soon as possible. It can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. So emotionally can lead to anger, irritability, a sense of hopelessness. Physically, it can cause headaches and abdominal pain and high blood pressure. Cognitively, it can lead to difficulty concentrating, self-blame, low self-esteem. Behaviorally, we think about substance use, chronic lateness, lack of joy. And all of these things are going to make your life harder if you're in a caring role where, you can imagine if you're angry and hopeless and you can't concentrate and you're thinking poorly about yourself, you're not going to be at your best for those around you. And so when we're thinking back to that oxygen analogy, we want to take care of ourselves and be aware of these signs so that this is not what we're bringing to work with us every day. Certainly from like a selfish standpoint, that this feels terrible and we want to feel happy and fulfilled in our roles and in our lives, but also for those that we're showing up to work for. These are certainly not attributes of someone who's doing their best work in a social work or behavioral health setting. And so talking specifically about burnout. Burnout is a hot topic these days. It's something that we hear a lot about, but it does have a specific definition. It is kind of difficult to describe, but it's a physical, emotional, or mental exhaustion accompanied by decreased motivation, lowered performance, and negative attitudes towards oneself and others. And so this is not, a medical condition that you're going to find in the DSM, but it does include specific symptoms, things like feelings of sadness or hopelessness, depressive-like symptoms, fatigue, difficulties sleeping, changes in diet and appetite, loss of pleasure in activities that you used to enjoy, can even go so far to instill suicidal ideation in people. And certainly, when you're looking at this list of symptoms, it can sound a lot like the symptoms of depression or other serious mental health illnesses, but burnout is in response to a specific environment or situation. So for most people, burnout is very specific to their job. And so it can be brought on by a lot of different parts of a job, but the point of distinguishing it from other mental health struggles is that if you remove the impetus for the burnout, so if you take the job away, then the burnout goes away. Whereas depression is very much down to a biological impetus where, you can't just change your environment and have depression go away. Meanwhile, burnout is very much specific to an environment or a situation. And so I have another video on burnout, and this one's a little bit longer, but it's from a psychiatrist who does a really good job of explaining what burnout is and how to look for it from her own experience, which I think is pretty insightful.
These days we talk a lot about burnout. But as a psychologist, I recognize that we have a lot of misconceptions when it comes to burnout. We think burnout is any time you're feeling a little bit overworked or a little bit stressed or a little bit tired. But it turns out that burnout is a very special kind of clinical syndrome that has a couple of very particular symptoms. One of the symptoms we often think about is a sense of emotional exhaustion. But this is richer than just a sense of physical exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion isn't just about being tired. It's really about feeling like you cannot emotionally handle another thing on your plate. If one thing comes on, that's it. The whole house of cards is going to fall. Even when you get a really great night rest or a week off, you're still feeling kind of emotionally tired and overloaded. That's the first symptom, this sense of emotional exhaustion. The second symptom, which I think is even more profound, is a sense of what's often called depersonalization or cynicism. You're just kind of on a short fuse with the people around you, whether that's the people you're serving in your job, your clients or your patients, or your other teammates. It's like everything they say kind of irks you a little bit, and it feels like if there's one more request, you're just going to lose it and freak out. You're also very cynical about people's intentions. You kind of feel like they have bad intentions for the asks that are coming your way. That's a sense of depersonalization. But the third symptom is a sense of personal ineffectiveness. You just feel like even if you were doing your job perfectly, it wouldn't matter, or there are structural constraints that make it impossible to do what you really value doing. So even if you're doing your job well, you feel like it kind of doesn't matter. It's not giving you the same value it was before. So this is burnout. It's not just a sense of stress or overwork. So I think it's important to distinguish between stress and burnout. We sometimes lump the two together, but burnout is a very particular kind of clinical syndrome. We tend to think of burnout as a modern phenomenon, but there's evidence that something like burnout has been happening for a while, at least since the Industrial Revolution. But some of the best research on burnout happened in the 1980s and 1990s and was mostly done by this fantastic researcher, Christina Maslach, who's talked about some of the features that tend to lead to burnout. One of the features that tends to lead to burnout is an increased workload, or a workload that really feels just too overwhelming. That isn't enough to lead to burnout over time, but this can be an exacerbating feature. Another feature that tends to lead to burnout is what Maslach calls a values mismatch. You get into your job thinking you're doing something, but in practice, in the trenches, the job feels like something else. I'm speaking about burnout right now as a scientist, but also as somebody who's experienced the syndrome a little bit myself. I feel like I became a college professor and a head of college on campus because I wanted students to have a fantastic experience. But then when COVID hit, it just felt like what we were doing wasn't what I signed up for anymore. There was this mismatch. Another feature that can lead to burnout in an organization is a sense of unfairness. This can also cause a certain sense of community breakdown. When there's a sense that things are a little bit unfair, maybe there's differences in compensation, that can lead to a sense of burnout. The final thing that's really important for burnout is your sense of reward. What leads us to kind of get flow and feel happy in our jobs is a sense of intrinsic reward. When things become pushed more towards the extrinsic reward, and also when those extrinsic rewards, especially when they start feeling a little bit unfair, that can lead to a sense of burnout over time. If you're wondering if you're going through burnout, a few questions you can ask yourself involve those big symptoms we just talked about. First, this sense of emotional exhaustion. Are you really, really exhausted? Not just physically exhausted, but emotionally exhausted. When you take a weekend off, are you still as depleted when you go back on Monday morning? And does it really feel like a form of exhaustion that's very emotional? It's not just that you're tired, but that you're feeling really depressed, that emotionally you're on just a really short fuse. Are you experiencing changes in how you relate to people at your work? Either the people that you serve, your clients, your patients, or the people that you work with? Are you embarrassed about the length of your fuse? Do you feel like you're going through some compassion fatigue? That's a clear sense that you're experiencing depersonalization. And is your sense of meaning going away in terms of what you're doing? Do you feel like your work has changed, that you simply can't do a good job right now because of some of the structures of what you're asked to do or the fairness in your own institution? If you're answering yes to some of those questions, you may be on the verge of burnout, and it's important to address that before it gets worse. So what if you're already feeling a little bit emotionally exhausted, a little bit cynical, a little bit like your job isn't effective as much anymore? This is the point when you need to think about treating burnout. And we can think about treatment as having an organizational side and a personal side. Organizationally, I think different industries need to pay a lot of attention to burnout. And one of the main ways to fix burnout is to make some changes to people's workloads, to people's sense of values, and to the rewards that people are getting. Those changes are really essential steps to treating burnout once it's there. But as an individual, the best thing that you can do, aside from kind of trying to promote more of these structural changes at work, is to really take good care of yourself. And I mean that in particular, not just in terms of the kinds of things you do which matter, getting more social connection, making sure you have some free time, but also to think about how you're structuring your relationship with work. Often we bring the best of ourselves to work and leave the leftovers for everything else, for our families, for leisure, and so on. If you're really putting too much of your identity emphasis on work, that's the kind of thing that can lead to burnout, because those values feel like they matter so much to you. It's all of your identity that's wrapped up in this. When there's a mismatch, it can hit you even harder. So to address my own burnout, I decided to take a sabbatical, but it was important that I stayed very intentional about paying attention to my value systems during that sabbatical. I really tried to invest more in my relationships outside of work. So it wasn't just friendships at work that were making up my whole social life. I tried to re-engage more with other things that I value, hobbies, things as silly as like playing a little bit more Guitar Hero, but also engaging a little bit more with things like my health, like making sure I'm moving my body. It's really trying to engage all the values and the things you care about outside of work so you can start to develop an identity in that and not just in what you're doing for your job.
And so I think she does, obviously, she is someone who knows a lot about this and does a really great job of explaining what all burnout is and why it's important to be on the lookout for. I don't think all of us are in a position where if we're feeling burnt out, we can just take a sabbatical, as nice as that would be. So maybe not the most realistic in terms of how to circumvent the issues around it. But I think that she brings up very good points for people like us who work in nonprofits, this idea of, kind of intrinsic reward versus extrinsic reward. And for a lot of people that work for, admirable causes, we can tend to wrap up our whole identity in the cause that we're working towards, where, if there starts to be a mismatch or if things start to not turn out as we anticipated they would be, that we can very easily get burnt out because our whole identity in our life is wrapped up in the work that we do. Where, a lot of people get into nonprofit work because they care about the cause and it is noble and admirable, but it can't be 100% of your life, And so who gets burnt out? It can definitely happen to anyone, but people will be at different levels of risk depending on their past work experiences, their ability to disconnect or relax at home. Some people are much more able to turn off email and disconnect in off hours. Others are not so much able to do that. It certainly depends on the support system that you have and the sense of purpose that you feel in the role. So it's very possible that two people can be doing the same job at the same company. One person might be struggling with burnout while the other is totally fine and doesn't feel burnt out at all. So it is very, dependent on the person. So what are some other things that can cause burnout? A lack of control is something that can lead to feelings of burnout. So disruptions and changes due to COVID, all of our jobs changed due to COVID. It made us feel like we had a lack of control over what's happening, kind of this larger sense of hopelessness. I think that certainly caused a lot of people to feel burnt out. Not having a say in your schedule and long, stressful commutes can definitely cause feelings of burnout. A lack of clarity about what is expected of you can make it difficult to feel like you're doing a good job. So certainly for people who are in managerial roles, knowing that lack of clarity about what's expected is something that can lead to burnout. Trying to be clear in what we're expecting of those that we manage and those that we work with can really help to prevent. Conflicts with others, certainly political instability, arguments within and outside the workplace can cause burnout. For those of us who work with students, things like difficulties getting the information and getting what you need from the schools and the teachers so that you feel like you have an idea of what you're getting into when you're interacting with a student or a group. That could certainly cause feelings of burnout. It could also be, like Dr. Santos mentioned in that video, consistently feeling like the work that you're doing isn't making a difference if you're kind of going through a rough patch, or that what you're doing doesn't feel like it matters. And then definitely too heavy of a workload. So not allowing for enough work-life balance definitely can cause feelings of burnout. And so I wanted to pose this question if anybody had anything to add in the chat of what you do specifically to prevent burnout. If you have any things that you do on an individual basis, feel free to put something in the chat. I know that I am someone who tries to take as much vacation as I'm allowed. I try not to let all of my days build up till the very end of the year. I think taking time off is a good one. Linda, do you have anything that you do?
It's really depressing. I take care, like I do laundry, I take care of things that will build up at night and make me tense and not allow me to relax. So if I need a break between meetings or something, so that's not really a good one because but that's how I function, sort of getting things out of the way that will kind of bother me later on, so that my evenings are free.
Yep. I see Wendy put in the chat hobbies, definitely. So leaning into hobbies and things outside of work. Bree says days off are days off. Fill them with things that make me happy. Yes, absolutely.
So laundry is not a good answer.
It's not a bad answer. Wendy says to make sure to have one creative day a week for myself. That is awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And so some ways that experts have said to prevent compassion fatigue and burnout, specifically in the workplace. So setting boundaries whenever possible. So disconnecting from work in the evenings, on weekends, on vacation time, if possible. We know it's not always possible, but whenever you can, trying to have some strict off time. Practicing self-care, which we'll talk about. Seeking support, being honest with trusted supervisors about how you feel. Debriefing and connecting with coworkers to an extent. You don't want it to turn into a kind of a complaining, dumping sesh where everyone is very negative, because that can really feed on itself and turn into a cycle of unhappiness in the workplace where, you certainly want to be able to be honest and connect with your coworkers, but you don't want it to turn into negativity that feeds on itself. Also, if possible, trying to say no to extra responsibilities. If you feel like your plate is getting full, you don't have to be at 150% above and beyond all the time. There are some times where you can say no to some of that extra work, if possible, so that you can bring your workload back to a reasonable amount. And of course, taking time off. Sick time is something that all workers in the US have for a reason. It might not be paid for everybody, but something that systemically we could certainly be better about, but taking time off is very important. How to address compassion fatigue and burnout. So recognizing the signs of it before it gets worse. If we can check in with ourselves about some of those things mentioned in the video, our emotional exhaustion, kind of that cynicism, depersonalization, if we're aware that those are signs of burnout and not just us turning into desensitized bad workers, then, we can recognize what might be happening to us. Finding new meaning in work. Maybe that means that you need to shuffle around some of your responsibilities or projects. Maybe you need to change teams. Maybe you need to try some new things, get some new tasks, or certainly seeking professional help if it gets to a point where you feel like you need some help. This is not something to just push through. Often you have to change the circumstances in order for it to get better. It's not just, for a lot of people, it's not just something that you can kind of keep working through and doing the same thing and just hope that it passes. Linda, was there something you wanted to add? Okay. And so what are some things that employers can do to try to support the supporters? Employers can encourage self-care, encourage employees to take breaks, get enough rest, take lunch breaks, connect with colleagues. They can provide resources, things like EAPs, those counseling services for employees, support groups, mental health hotlines can be offered to employees. They can offer training on things like stress management, self-care, and coping strategies to help manage stress and avoid burnout. You know, stress management and self-care are not things that come inherently to everybody, so having some training around those topics can be very helpful. Trying to create a supportive work environment that allows for employees to have some control over their own schedule, to have ample time off, to have reasonable workloads and opportunities for professional development to kind of deepen their meaning and connection to what they're doing. Recognize and appreciate verbal recognition, bonuses, extra time off, or other forms of appreciation can really go a long way in helping employees feel supported. And, you know, certainly employers want to, or I would say most employers want to help their employees just out of the goodness of their hearts, but, you know, selfishly on their end, all of this will promote better productivity, better work climate, better relationships between all of the employees. So it really is a win-win. You know, the people that are working are happier and healthier, leading to a happier and healthier workplace for everybody. And so now jumping into self-care. So not talking so specifically about workplace wellness and compassion, fatigue, and burnout, talking about what we can do for ourselves outside of work. And self-care, again, is another hot topic buzzword, but it's very subjective. You know, one self-care strategy that works for someone may not work for someone else. And it can be a very frustrating process if you're trying to start your self-care journey. If you're trying out all of these different techniques and exhausting different ones before finding what works for you, it can be an annoying process. And it can be very frustrating when, you know, 15 different people have told you how yoga changed their life, but you try it and you hate it and it doesn't work for you at all. And so we know that self-care can look very different from how it's portrayed in the media and self-help books and all of these things. But the important thing is to put effort into it and to keep trying. If you don't find ways to relax and recenter and recharge and ground yourself in the things that matter to you, things like burnout and stress overload can really take over and they'll force you to make time for it. And so you don't want to get to the point where you're forced out of commission and kind of life goes off the rails because we weren't proactive enough in caring for ourselves to begin with. This is a basic daily check-in from one of our other colleagues. If you're someone who is new to, you know, mindfulness or meditation or self-care or all of this, and you just have no idea where to start, doing something like a daily check-in is an easy way to get started. Just asking yourself how I'm feeling today. Right now in this moment, am I hungry? Am I anxious? Am I annoyed? Am I lonely? Am I tired? Am I thirsty? Just naming what we're feeling is technically mindfulness and can help us kind of center ourselves in the present and help us to counteract what might be feeling bad in that moment. Another important aspect of this is recognizing our limits. And again, this kind of goes on with the nonprofit caring professional world. So part of avoiding compassion fatigue specifically is recognizing that we are not all powerful all by ourselves. You know, we can worry about how a student or a client is doing and also be reassured that we've done our part to help them as best as we can. So we can do the best that we can within our limits and within our scope of work, and then step back and feel content with that. which I know is hard to do. Yeah, Linda.
Yeah, no, and again, not to kind of derail this from the focus on you all and your own self-care, but again, this is a really important lesson to convey to students, to parents, to other professionals that you work with. In each of those roles, this holds true. So it's not just as the professional providing care, but parents need to hear this as well. You could do your best. There are things that are outside of the perimeters of what you're able to change and do when it comes to raising kids. It's true for young people themselves to recognize, especially like in high stress, sort of high pressure academic environments or achievement kind of cultures where they feel like they're never doing enough. So this is like a really important message that kind of goes across not just how we care for ourselves in a professional role, but in our personal lives and in providing advice and help to those we work with. It's just such a key concept.
Definitely. Thanks for that.
Yep.
And so taking the time for this, we want to stress the idea that taking time for yourself is not necessarily taking time away from your work or taking time away from the clients that you work with. Because that idea of you can't pour from an empty cup and you're going to need to take care of yourself in order to take care of others. It's never too late to start making space in your days for self-care. If you're someone who knows that you don't prioritize your own well-being and are not sure how to take those first steps, it can be pretty daunting, but there's no time like the present. We don't want people to be afraid to ask for help. This is not something that you have to do on your own. Again, self-care is going to look very different for everyone. It could mean making time for fun, not necessarily like super relaxing. Maybe you're not someone who's going to do yoga and meditate, but maybe you just need to find more fun things in your day. And it's okay to say no to extra responsibilities. And so, we want to encourage people to feel like they have the opportunity to prioritize their self-care. So if that means, you need childcare for a day so that you can go do something fun, or if you need a day off to do something relaxing, or you need some help with your tasks so that you can have some free time at the end of the day, we want people to be able to make those things happen for themselves. And certainly, especially those of you who work with young people, what kids need, especially if they're struggling, is for us as a parent or as their mentor or as their teacher. What they need is for us to be a steady presence. And so the only way we can do that is if we have a place to take our own concerns and if we are taking care of ourselves so that we can be that steady presence for others. And so some aids to well-being. These are the low-hanging fruit that all of us are probably aware of. This is the first order of business if we feel ourselves getting run down or if we feel ourselves getting burnt out. Things like moving our bodies, things like getting enough sleep, trying to eat some more vegetables, getting outside for a little bit, getting some fresh air, practicing some breathing techniques, putting our phone down. That's a really hard one, but if we recognize that the doom scrolling is taking a toll, we can put it down for a little bit and take a little break. Talking to friends and family and monitoring our feelings and emotions. And certainly all of these things are not going to get done in one day. If we could do all of these every day, we would all be wellness gurus. But if we're starting to feel bad, if we can just check off one or two of these from the list, it's only going to put us on a kind of a healthier trajectory for that day. And so a little bit about mindfulness. If it's something that you haven't explored before, it is a specific type of meditation. And this is a very ancient practice that has been going on for millennia. This is not a modern invention by any means. And mindfulness is all about being present, focusing on what you're feeling in the moment. There's a lack of judgment or interpretation. And so people in mindfulness practice, thoughts come by, you have thoughts, you try not to stew on them or get sucked into your thoughts. You just let them pass by. You're not judging the thoughts, you're not interpreting the thoughts, you just kind of let them go in one ear and out the other. Mindfulness has a very robust evidence base. Mindfulness has been shown to improve memory, learning, emotion regulation, and can reduce symptoms of anxiety and stress. There's a lot of different strategies that someone can use to get to a place of mindfulness. So there's a lot of things like breathing techniques and guided imagery that can help our mindfulness practice. There's things like the 5 senses grounding techniques, which I don't remember what order they go in and how you're supposed to do it, but the main idea of the 5 senses grounding techniques, you hear about it a lot in therapy practice, to pull us out of a stressful moment or something that's very activating. It's like you pick out 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 that you can smell, and 1 that you can taste. And then you kind of go back the other direction. It's really about kind of focusing on what's happening in the now, and it can kind of quiet whatever brain noise or stressful thing is happening. Focusing on the breath, just closing your eyes and thinking about your breathing, that is mindfulness practice. And then body scans, which I personally like body scans. I got into them in high school with my modern dance teacher. But basically a body scan is where you are moving through all of the different parts of your body and just focusing on them one by one and how they're feeling in that moment. So a lot of people will do it lying down and your eyes are closed and you're starting to kind of just focus on, okay, what do my feet feel like on the ground? What do my calf muscles feel like on the ground? What do my knees feel like? And then you just kind of move through the whole body, and when you're focusing on that, you're not thinking about whatever you're worried about for the next day. A lot of people find body scans helpful to fall asleep. And so on some of the meditation apps or on YouTube, you can hear there's a lot of pre-recorded body scans where someone can kind of take you through that guided practice on your own. So if you've never tried one before, might be something to look up. But again, very subjective. You might try it and hate it, and that is a-okay. When venturing into self-care and trying to avoid burnout, there is this idea of radical acceptance, which again is a term that many people may have heard in their own therapeutic practice. But radical acceptance is noticing when you're fighting against reality, instead of feeling bitter and resentful and wishing things were different and thinking life isn't fair, kind of just accepting what's happening in the now and how do I move forward? Reminding yourself that you can't change what's already happened, can't change the past, acknowledge that there's no going back, and we're thinking about the present and the future. Turning our energy towards coping with things that you can change. Embracing feelings, it's okay and very valid to have these negative feelings of being angry, scared, or overwhelmed. And so we want to validate and accept those feelings without judgment so that we can work through them in a healthier way and get to a healthier place of being. If radical acceptance in some of these points feels like it resonates very well with you, I highly encourage people to look more into it and try to, there's a lot of mantras and meditations kind of around this idea that you could find very helpful. So these are some coping statements rooted in this radical acceptance idea. It is what it is. That's a very common one these days. I can't change what has already happened. I can accept things the way that they are. I can only control my own actions and reactions. I find that one to be very helpful. And this was written by one of our other colleagues, but if it's something that you think might help you, you can write your coping statements on Post-its or something else to post throughout where they will be brought to your mind's eye throughout the day. So if you see them multiple times a day, you don't have to rely on yourself to think of them in times of need. They'll just be there as a reminder. And we wanted to be sure to talk about the commercialization of self-care these days. Obviously, it's a very hot topic, and the wellness industry is a behemoth, multi-trillion-dollar industry. Last year, the wellness industry was worth over $6 trillion and is growing every year. There's a Global Wellness Institute that projected that the industry will grow to $8.5 trillion by 2027. So there's a lot of money to be made in this, which is what we want to be aware of. So, I included this from Parks and Rec if you've seen it, but like the treat yourself mentality. A lot of people conflate self-care with like treating yourself and spending money on yourself and splurging. And that can certainly work in some cases. If you need to take a day off to get your hair done and get your nails done and feel great about yourself, that's one thing. But self-care does not have to be expensive. It's vital to take time off to take care of ourselves physically and mentally. But wellness and self-care is not going to magically appear in your life with a pill or a powder or a multivitamin or a tea. So, most of the techniques and strategies that are rooted in evidence and have been around for thousands of years, all of these things are totally free. Things like mindfulness and, meditation. And so we want to be wary of companies who are selling this idea of wellness because it very quickly becomes you buy one thing and then you have to buy something else and then you have to buy something else. And it's kind of this consistent treadmill that you're on that you never get to where you feel like you have enough because you're constantly being sold more and more products that, they want you to feel like you can't be happy and you can't be healthy without this new thing. But, a lot of, it's difficult to repress those urges, especially when the marketing is all around us. But, self-care, again, does not have to be something that you have to spend money on. Linda, was there anything you wanted to add to this idea? Okay. And we threw this in kind of as a bonus, again, written by one of our colleagues, Marianne, this idea of wellness over the holidays. This, again, can be a very stressful time of year and can be a good time for us to practice some of our self-care techniques. So trying to say no and set boundaries to things that are not serving us, try to delegate some tasks and let others do work for you. If making pies and baking is not something that brings you a lot of joy, maybe buy one for this Christmas or this holiday. We want to let go of some rituals that are adding more stress to the plate, simplify decorating to just essentials if that's something that really wears you down. We can prioritize healthy, lower cost options. If gatherings are very stressful for you, kind of put yourself first and make an appearance and then leave whenever you need, and set boundaries and limits for yourself with certain family members or certain people that are not bringing a lot of added joy to your life. It can be easy to get wrapped up in what's expected over the holidays, and it can really run us down and make us feel pretty awful come January. So we want to be consistently thinking about what we need during this time. Some quick things of what friends and family can do. I feel like a lot of this is pretty basic. So just offering practical support. If you see that someone is struggling, help out with some chores, run some errands, help with childcare. Connect with parents and others in caring professions in your life on a regular basis. Having that consistent social network. So scheduling regular calls or weekly hangouts can be really beneficial. Recognizing the signs of distress. So learning more about these mental health challenges, learning more about what burnout looks like so that we can offer support when needed and know when someone might need more help. What communities and schools can do. We want to have open dialogues like this about stress, mental health, and well-being in culturally appropriate ways, knowing that these things and self-care are going to look very different for everyone. We want to equip parents with resources and connect them to social support services. We want to create opportunities for social connections among parents and caregivers and those in caring professions. We want to elevate the parent voice when shaping community programs and investments, especially if they're made for families. We want to have family voices involved and strengthen school-based support programs. Some quick resources. These are 3 that I've used. So things like Headspace, free meditation apps that if you don't know how to get started in meditation or mindfulness and feel like it's something that could be helpful for you, Headspace is a good place to start. Better Sleep is what I use for rain sounds or white noise if I feel like the external noise and anxiety and stress is getting a little bit too loud. Also, ambiance videos on YouTube. I use a lot of these for free. This is a favorite one of mine that's kind of ridiculous, but it's heaters blowing into fans that creates this very mind-numbing white noise that kind of drowns out everything else. So definitely encourage taking a look into those if you feel like you need some something to drown out what else is going on in your brain. I also wanted to plug this book. I just heard, this is written by Dr. Jessie Gold, and I just listened to a webinar that she spoke at last week, and has a lot of great information about, not just doctors, but anyone in a caring or advocacy role, how to take better care of themselves. And she speaks from her own personal experience, feeling burnt out during COVID. She is a professor of psychiatry at the University of Tennessee and is currently promoting this book. And her talk I thought was very powerful and had a lot of very good information in it. And I know we're at time, but I wanted to leave you with this quote to hopefully inspire us to take care of ourselves this week and this holiday season. But caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. So this is not just something we do to indulge ourselves, but it is very much to preserve ourselves. And that's all we have for you this week or this month. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you in the new year for some more. But thank you everyone for joining. Bree, I don't know if you wanted to close us out.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you both for being here and providing us with this much needed webinar, especially at the end of the year where times are busy, a lot is asked of us, but knowing ourselves and what we need and the importance of speaking up and taking care of ourselves with that self-care is super important. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everyone.